In this episode, we discuss the Surgeon General's push to get warning labels on social media apps, Louisiana's new law that is requiring or that wants to require the 10 Commandments to be displayed in public school classrooms, and the significance of the first era of America's pastime, which is baseball, where all the best players played in the major leagues following the death of Willie Mays. Hello, welcome to the Call Like I See It podcast. I'm James Keys, and riding shotgun with me is a man who, when he hops on the mic, he's really doing a public service announcement more than a podcast. Tunde Ogunlana. Tunde, you think it's time for me to just get out of the way and allow you to reintroduce yourself?
Yeah, geez, I was ready for that Humpty dance thing, but I just, I'm getting old. And for the YouTube viewers, I'm standing back here on purpose.
Misplaced the reference.
Because, no, isn't it Humpty Dance? You know, the whole...
No. That could have been a direction I went. I went a different direction. That's what I'm saying.
Okay. My bad. Yeah. So I'm definitely not with it today. And I'm standing back for the YouTube viewers so people can see my shirt because I wear Smart Alex shirts on purpose. But I realize when they edit this thing, it all gets cut off. So at least you know why I'm a cat person if you get the joke. And then we can start the show. Sorry.
All right. So that is you reintroducing yourself right there.
Yeah. I'm reintroducing myself as a cat person.
There we go.
Different kind of cat. only for aviation nerds.
There you go. Now, before we get started, if you enjoy the show, I ask that you subscribe, you hit like on YouTube or your podcast app. Doing so really helps the show out. We're recording this on June 25th, 2024. And last week, we saw the U.S. Surgeon General come out advocating for warning labels on social media apps, really going hard on how harmful these apps are, particularly to young people. And we also saw some reports coming out that were relating to the court cases that have been going on. 40 plus states in the District of Columbia, through their attorney generals, have sued social media companies, including like Meta and so forth. And there's been revelations as far as evidence that's been filed in court that really illustrates how much these companies and how early these companies knew that their products were harmful and particularly harmful to children. And so both of these hit at the same time. And it's looking like, okay, yeah, the social media companies, and at least for many of us, are who we thought they were. And their products are as harmful as maybe they are thought to be. And all of this is hitting at the same time. And, this is an interesting story, but we wanted to dig into it a little bit more. So let's start with the Surgeon General piece. Tunde, just what were your thoughts with the Surgeon General coming out talking about warning labels, like the kind that are on alcohol or tobacco?
I don't disagree with it. So I think it's the fascinating part to me. It's kind of another example of how we truly are now, the 21st century, and we're full in the information age. Like literally, I mean, I'm not going to say we left the industrial age. Obviously, we have industrial age infrastructure.
We're built on top of the industrial.
Correct.
It's not the height of what we do anymore.
Good point, because you're right. We're built on top of the Bronze Age and every other age.
We don't get rid of that stuff.
So we are. So let me just keep going. We're in the information age, and that's my point. Like the desire, the need, however you want to put it, of a regulator to say that now something digital has just as negative health effects as things in prior eras and generations that we could only find physically, like putting in our body and things like that. I'm thinking of tobacco and alcohol and other things that have warnings on them. So yeah, it's fascinating from that point that we've now developed as a society with the technology and kind of merged it together, where now we do have these issues where the technology that we use every day also can have extremely negative health effects, mostly through the psychological side, on us as individuals, and obviously with kids. So I commend it. I support it. I actually think we should probably expand some of this stuff past just children. I think it's well documented as doing most of our society, including most adults, a lot of harm as well. But I'll save that for a different show.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that it's, I mean, this is what, if the Surgeon General is the top doctor in the United States, you know, like the U.S. government, you know, head of the medical kind of community in that sense, then, I mean, this is what the Surgeon General should be doing, is trying to figure out where there's threats maybe that, because what a warning label does is about more so just letting people know, you know, like there are warning labels on tobacco, there's warning labels on alcohol, but it doesn't mean you can't buy it. It just means that there's just going to be this label there that says, hey, you know, this is harmful for your health and, you know, whatever else. And so increasing awareness. And so I think the approach in a society that holds itself out, or likes to think of itself as a free society, the approach isn't necessarily to say, hey, let's ban this or anything like that. The approach is say, hey, let's make sure people know what they're getting what they're getting involved in here, or what their kids are getting involved in here. And so that's what a warning label would do, is kind of bring that to the forefront. The fight really seems to be shaping up to be an interesting one, though, because social media companies, like, what they do is mind control. You know, like that's literally what they do. And so it'll seem to be a really uphill to how do you fight back against a company that is built on controlling what you see and what you think. And so, like, I don't think this has a snowball's chance in hell, because it's like, well, these companies will just be able to tune the algorithms of the majority of people and ultimately make it so that people want this harm. You know, like that's what they want. Like this is what charges them up and everything like that. So to me, I think he's doing what he's supposed to be doing, and, you know, starting a conversation and so forth. And it's possible. I mean, I would like to acknowledge it's possible that something like this will get momentum and get moving. But it really does seem to be like, hey, let's try to push back and restrict the group of people that have our minds under control. And it's like, well, hey, that why would they allow us to do that if they're in control of our minds truly?
You know, it's interesting, man, as you're talking, because I know we had an offline conversation about the dynamic and the kind of polar opposite nature of two dystopian novels, one being 1984 and the other being A Brave New World.
Yeah.
And how we've been conditioned in our culture to be more concerned and to kind of look out for the 1984 version of authoritarianism and kind of the boogeyman that could get us all uncomfortable as in a democratic society. And, you know, based on our conversation, the more, even as you're saying it, the more I was like, yeah, this is all like a soma coma. If you remember A Brave New World, like we are, like you said, these companies are getting us as a society to the point where we're running into kind of chaos willingly. Just kind of an emotional chaos, intellectual and psychological chaos based on the fracturing of information and all the stuff we've talked about on various discussions on the show. But this is why it's interesting, because kind of like what Sandy Hook represented, at least at the time, was the first time a mass shooting really was targeted only at children. And there was a moment when the society kind of looked like, hey, we might have to look at how we deal with this mass shooting stuff in a certain way. And since then, not much has been done, right? So we had a potential choice to do something and we didn't. This makes me feel something similar that, and again, like you well said, and I think about like the gun debate is similar. No one's saying that adults can't have guns. No one's saying that we shouldn't honor the Second Amendment and all that. But then you can argue about things like bump stocks and certain types of weaponry that may be only reserved for military versus civilians, especially not all civilians are responsible with these things. And I think we can look at the internet via social media the same way, where, yeah, adults can use it. Not all adults are responsible, but we wouldn't allow 12 and 10-year-old kids to go out and buy firearms on their own. And I think the same thing here, because I'll quote from one of the articles. It says, the state lawsuits against Meta reflect mounting concerns that teenagers and children on social media can be sexually solicited, harassed, bullied, body shamed, and algorithmically induced into compulsive online use. So that all sounds very negative. And, you know, that's where I'll pass it back to you, because normally in our society, when something like that is identified to having those type of collective negative effects on children, to your point, somebody usually wants to do something about it and make sure that kids aren't exposed to that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And just, like the conversation on the books you were talking about was just, because you and I are looking at, and have been through the book Amusing Ourselves to Death, which we'll be talking about, in the coming month on the show. And it really did kind of bring out this dichotomy of what we're worried about versus what we might just slide into. The thing that, to me, where this is I thought the gun analogy was really good, but I'm going to go back to the alcohol and tobacco. What those are, and this is just following up on your point from before, those are chemicals that trigger our brains in a certain way that lead to addiction and other harmful effects. What the social media thing is really interesting about is that it doesn't have to do anything chemically to your brain in order to create those same type of brain chemistry effects that make you get hooked or, affect your emotions in ways that could be harmful to life in general. And so, to me, like the question is, and this is the question that's raised with, what you're talking about in terms of when we see like following Sandy Hook, like who is going, do we as a society need protection from industry in this sense? Industry whose aim is to just make money and without regard, externalize their costs or externalize costs, societal costs, whatever, internalize profits. Like that's what the industry is trying to do. Do we need protection from that, or should we all be going it on our own? And the ones of us that are responsible can, just make do, and then the ones who aren't are going to have, negative effects, and then those the negative effects that the ones who aren't responsible might bring down the rest of us, and so forth. So that's when you start looking at the role of government, because typically when you have a industry that wants to dump pollution in a river, for example, the only people that can really stand up to it is the government, whether that be the court system or legislatures and so forth with, clean water, regulation or anything like that. So when we're talking about social media, the question always, comes up, okay, well, what is the role of the government in this? Because generally speaking, throughout history, the thought is that the little guy doesn't stand a chance standing up to the big industry in that sense. If one person said, "Hey, I don't want you dumping toxic stuff into the water," oftentimes without action of the government, and that's action of the government through the court system also, the little guy doesn't really stand a chance. The little guy can't boycott a company and cause them to stop dumping poison in if the dumping poison in allows them to externalize costs. So that's the point we come to. We've come to that point many a times with the firearm debate. We came to that point with tobacco, and big tobacco won for decades before the tide finally turned, and you were able to really start to hold them account for saying, hey, you guys can still make money, but you can't lie to people about what this is doing to people. You got to be honest about that. And tobacco companies didn't go away. They're still there. And right now, it appears in our society that we're just not good at dealing with that. Like there's certain threats. It's amazing to me. Like certain threats can get masses of people mobilized, or I should say this, certain perceived threats can get masses of people mobilized. Like the idea, teaching Black history is going to make people feel guilty. And people get mobilized about that and get really fired up. And it's like, there aren't studies that show that, this is causing harm to kids. But something like this, where there are studies, even internal documents in social media companies like, yeah, this stuff is bad for the kids, but, oh, well. And we aren't able to get mobilized, as far as that kind of that energy, as far as, hey, we got to do something about this. And the same thing, obviously with the firearms, to your point, where it's like, oh, well, we just saw these kids get killed. But we're not able to get mobilized as a society really to say, okay, we're going to do something about this. Again, we're not talking about banning things, but we're just like, okay, we got to come up with some way where as a society, we can make this work in a way without balance the freedom with the ability for everyone to exercise that freedom without walking around getting shot or walking around dealing with mass depression because it's not a fair fight between all of those programmers and psychologists who are preparing social media apps versus me sitting in my living room or, anything like that.
Yeah, Tindra, as you're talking, I was thinking in my head, like, imagine if big tobacco was able to lobby the government in the 50s and 60s, like they do today, like these tech companies, spending hundreds of millions of dollars a year to make sure that
back then
regulators don't
relative to the time.
Yeah, I was going to say, but I just think that it's out of control now in terms of because unlike tobacco, think about it. Most of the legislators, I mean, I'd say maybe not the judicial system, but the majority of our legislators use these platforms to continue to maintain their own power through popularity, fundraising, and all that.
But even with that, though, Probably. I mean, most of the judicial system might be, or at least a good number of the judicial system might be using this stuff to get their information. And so therefore
so
liable for the brain manipulation.
Yeah. That's what I mean. It's more than tobacco or any other kind of topic. I think this is just so kind of, we're so enmeshed in it now with that I think people are also scared of what would it be like if the world went back to like 20 years ago, 2004, where we're not totally like enmeshed into online, where you actually, instead of on your phone, everything's so easy, you might have to just go look at information on a desktop computer.
I don't even think you need to go back to 20 years, though, because a lot of what you see when they're talking, like, remember, the social media industry has gotten, quote unquote, better at getting people addicted over time. So the question, a lot of times these things come up, and that's what, a lot of the court filings, that we're seeing is that, for infinite scroll or the push notifications, there's things that they've begun doing over time that makes them become more addictive. And so the question is like, it's not going back to either you have all of this stuff and all of its glory, so to speak, or you have none of it. It's like, okay, well, how much do we allow them to turn up the kind of the addictive quality of this? Things that they, once they learn something, if we do this, it's very addictive. How much do we allow them to turn that up versus just providing the service? How secretive are they allowed to keep their algorithms? Like with respect to how they're presenting information and manipulating people with that. So these are all questions I think that have to be answered. The point that I have, the overall point that I have is just that if we want to have government of the people, by the people, and for the people, we got to pay attention to this stuff. At least a good number of us do. And then we have to be responsive to leadership and hold leadership to account in terms of whether they're looking at this stuff or whether they're off, playing other games with things that don't really matter in terms of concrete stuff that we can see from as being studied is affecting kids. Like, are we really protecting the kids? Or are we just, doing stuff that, feels good and makes us want to scream and holler, and that's it? And so that's kind of the obligation, like, again, I say this often, in democracy, you get the government you deserve. So if we're, constantly riled up on issues that aren't really that determinative, then that's what we're going to be doing. And we won't ever get to the important issues of, these people are taking advantage of our kids. Hey, let's try to reduce the ability for them to take advantage of our kids.
Yeah. Or well, it's this is, I think, a dilemma that's happening as you're talking. I'm thinking in my head about, like you're right. The people that have been very vocal in, let's say, the last just 3-4 years about parental rights at schools, and that, they don't want their kids being harmed by things like being exposed to, like you said, Black history, or not even Black history, American history that involves the contributions of Blacks and other non-white people.
Or what happened to Blacks.
So let's be very specific. This is American history. And we live in a state where a lot of those classes were banned in high school, advanced placement courses. So these were elective.
Yeah, and this is because it was said that this is to protect kids.
Yeah, this is protect kids. And then the same thing with, if a book has a rainbow on the cover, that has to go because, you got to protect kids from any influence of LGBT stuff and all that. So it's interesting, right, that crowd that's so vocal about protecting kids and all that kind of stuff doesn't seem to be as vocal about the threat of social media, which, my opinion, which is why this is our show, would be that the long-term negative effects of social media would be more harmful to a child long-term than to just being exposed about a wider
studies backing
exposure
up
of our history.
Yeah, one, there's studies backing it up, and the others, there's not. So
exactly. Yeah, you're right.
And that's not.
Good
I
point.
mean, I think
I want you to repeat that for a second. Hold on. There aren't any studies that show that teaching children full American history is detrimental to their health. I want to be sure that the audience heard you say that.
No. That's kind of like that's taken on faith. Some people can hear that and just believe it, I guess, because it just sounds believable. And I'm not saying that those are the only people that should be concerned about this. I'm pointing out that if that's their issue, then I would think, and I would want them to lead the charge here, and say, hey, if protecting kids is your thing, then shouldn't we be looking at the things that have been proven to really be harmful to kids? But we all need to be involved in this. This is something that this shouldn't be a partisan issue. This shouldn't be something that's polarized. This should be the mind controllers against the people whose minds are being controlled. And I mean, that's where I started with the
Some people are comfortable in the mind control world.
Yeah. So, but no,
Real quick,
go ahead.
You mentioned something I want to throw to you, and then I know we want to go. Is this is one of the few things I just wrote a note here that has actually been bipartisan, at least at the government level, and as an attorney yourself, the fact that 45 states attorneys general have signed on to a lawsuit. I mean, that's
there's several lawsuits.
Yeah, so that's what I mean. It's like one of the rare bipartisan things, which is nice to see here. That kind of, at least at the political level, both sides of the aisle would like to see this handled. So,
let me throw something at you real quick, though, just real quick. And this is actually, I mean, this is unfortunate to say, but that's part of the problem, is that because it's bipartisan and because so much kind of ground is covered these days by trying to draw a distinction between yourself and your political opponent, that bipartisan thing, if everybody agrees on things, instead of being stuff, hey, let's get some easy wins, it kind of falls by the wayside, because it's like, oh, well, I can't use this to drive a wedge between me and this other person. I can't use this to show a distinction between me and this other person. I can't. So that people who support me can be like, yeah, you got to watch out for that person, because
the irony is it wouldn't get clicks on social media.
Exactly. There you go. And it wouldn't get people fired up. You can't say that, oh, this person wants to, I'm trying to protect you from, from social media, and these people want to let the social media, raise your kids and all that. Like, you can't make those contrasts. And as a result, it actually, in our current political environment, because everybody agrees on it, so to speak, it gets less oxygen than it would if people disagreed and then could actually use it as a point of contrast.
Yep.
So yeah, but I think we can wrap from there. We appreciate everybody for joining us on part one of this discussion. Please, join us on part 2 and 3 as well, which will be coming up here shortly.